So let's get started. So Abigail, are you presenting to everyone? I still saw my face, but it was probably...
You need to click on the thing and it'll...
Okay, cool. Okay, so you're here for Legalizing My Biz Contracts 101. This is work 2 of a 3-part series. You are all registered for all 3. The first workshop went phenomenally, so we're excited to dive into some more stuff today with Christina. You belong here no matter where you are in your business journey, whether you're just starting out, figuring out these new business relationships with vendors or clients or customers, and you think that maybe you should kind of get protected in some realm. You belong here if that's where you are. You also belong here if maybe you've been in business a while and you might have been burned from an icky, non-contractual agreement before, and you want to prevent that. Or maybe you've just heard the horror stories of it happening to your friends, and you don't want that happening to you.
We want you to do everything in your power to feel legit and be legit and have your business protected. We're going to help you take your business seriously because we don't want anything to happen that's totally preventable. So today we're talking about contracts, and pretty much everything involving contracts allows you to protect yourself in a way that is just so much better than having verbal agreements or just assuming other people understand your scope and process. So this is really about nailing that down and making sure you're highlighting that for other people. You might have heard nightmare stories about how other people had stuff go terribly, terribly wrong, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen to you. So we are big believers in contracts. We use them every day in our business, and we're excited to share with you Christina's process to make sure you are covered.
So we know your excuses because we've made them before. You're worried that you have to actually hire and pay for an attorney or a lawyer to make your legal contracts for you. And you think that whole process is too complicated, overwhelming, scary, and full of legal jargon that you're going to get kind of sucked into something you're not ready to commit to. Maybe you're afraid it's going to take up way too much time in your day, and you think that whatever you've got going on right now is good enough. Well, we're here to bust all of those excuses. Christina will definitely set us all straight.
Because, babes, the goal is for you to build a business, not a hobby. So this is about implementation and getting it done. Who's excited and ready? I want to hear about it in the chat box. Tell me yes, yes, yes. I'm so ready for it.
So here's what we're going to learn today. You're going to learn everything you need to put a contract in place, the difference between implied and written agreements, because there's a super big difference, and how to avoid contract, which is a no-go. There's also some other amazing stuff that you're going to learn today, like if you need, exactly what you need to include in all of your contracts, every single detail so you don't forget anything and you make sure your booty is protected. Plus the easiest ways to send and receive signed, because that's the most important part, contracts, plus the favorite apps and tools that we use to get all of that done.
So guys, you can't miss the end because we are showing you a guided way to legalize your biz and get it totally legit. We're going to give you the best invitation in town to join the coolest club ever, and we're in it, so that's pretty awesome if I do say so myself. And as always, there's an exclusive VIP bonus, so we do not want you to miss out. I am Abigail Pumphrey, the co-founder, brand and business builder, flower enthusiast, and volunteer junkie. Emily is my cohort and also co-founder. She is now a decaf coffee chugger and houseplant hoarder. Christina Scalera is our beautiful, beautiful guest today. She is an attorney for creatives, and she is so ready to share with you her expertise and her insight into this whole realm. So, if you don't know us, Emily and I are going to give you a really quick background about us and our business. If you don't know, last year I got laid off, and I totally replaced my corporate income in 30 days. So I want to tell you guys, regardless of where you're at, you can do this, and you can have a business that feels legitimate. Emily was able to learn the ins and outs of business and has been able to work from home since 23, which is crazy town. Most people have to go off and get their corporate jobs like I did, but she decided to open her business straight out of college, and she's been working her booty off ever since. We've been able to grow a business together that supports our families, and we've done it in super, super speed. We've doubled our initial income in 1 year, and we're so happy to be doing this because we get to reach people all over the world, and you guys are seriously so incredible. We love you, and we're so happy you're here today. So I'm going to let Christina give you a little bit of her background and let her introduce herself.
Awesome. I hope everybody can hear me right now. You guys can hear me, right? Because I haven't jumped on yet. Okay, awesome. All right, guys, I am Christina Scalera. I live here in Atlanta. I'm an attorney, and I'm so excited to be talking to you today about contracts. These are some of my favorite things up here right now. If you're not following me on social media at Christina Scalera, then you don't already know this, but if you are, you probably do. I am a cupcake fanatic. It's like a bad obsession that I have. But I also love working on the legal and business aspects of building businesses, and that's why I do what I do. I started out in the corporate field, like everybody else, story of everybody's life, and then quit to become a private yoga teacher, which is totally a natural transition, not at all. I quickly realized that that was not what I wanted to do. I actually really did like helping people legally and in their businesses, and that was when I started blogging. I started following Abigail, actually, and I followed lots of different blogs and things like that. Just started attending webinars like you're doing today and building my business. Had no idea what I was doing, just kind of getting started, and quickly realized that there was a real need in the creative community and small business community for a legal resource for information and services even. So that was when I got started doing what I'm doing now. And looking back, I realized that it wasn't that I didn't like being a lawyer before I quit to become a private yoga instructor. It was that I didn't like my clients. So I love my clients now. I'm super excited to talk to you guys about your contracts today, and we're going to make it really fun. We're going to make it really lighthearted. It's not going to be scary, and this is really important because contracts are something that we all deal with every day, even if we haven't started our business yet. We have lease agreements, we have car purchases, we have homes that we buy. Whatever it is, everybody's dealing with contracts, and in your business, sometimes we don't put them in place, which is kind of scary. And it's not because we're bad people. We just don't put them in place because, one, we don't know that we should, or we don't know what should be there. And so let's just dive right in today and get started talking about what is a contract, how do you even get one, do you already have one, and just jump right into it. Yay. So with that, I'm going to pull up my screen share. All right, how does that look for everybody? We're looking okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, great. So just a quick disclaimer, because I'm an attorney and we have to do this annoying thing, right? So I just want to let all you guys know that everything that we're talking about today, it's all information that could change, and it is information. So I'm not giving out legal advice, and I'm not going to be answering any specific questions. Go ahead and ask, and if I can answer them with the best of my abilities today, I will. But if you're asking a specific question about your business or something like that, I'm not going to provide advice, just because that would be kind of negligent on my part if I didn't know all the facts surrounding your situation, and I'm trying to give you some kind of advice about that. So I am an attorney here in Georgia, but just because you're attending this presentation, or if you email me, if we have any communications afterwards, it doesn't create an attorney-client relationship. And that means that your communications with me, either in the chat or in the email or something like that, until you sign that agreement with me and become my client, they're not considered privileged or confidential. So just be aware of that. And like I said, feel free to ask, but just be careful not to share anything that you wouldn't want released or anything like that. Not that I share that, but if it's in the chat box or on a blog comment or something like that, I can't protect that. So this information that we're talking about today, it's just a general overview of the legal concepts surrounding contracts. And so this information changes, the law changes every day, but this is a pretty established area of the law. So I feel really good today talking to you guys about some really foundational aspects of building your contracts and things like that. So let's use common sense and let's figure this all out. All right, so contracts, why are they so scary? They are, though, aren't they? I mean, if you have ever been scared signing a contract or sending a contract, just type something in the little chat box and be like, yeah, I have, yeah, I've been there. Because I think at some point in our lives, even me as an attorney, I mean, there's been contracts that I've sent out that I've been like, oh, I really hope that goes well, and I hope I included everything. Not as an attorney, I'm just saying, like, in my younger years, like in college, signing a lease agreement, or you know, when I first started my first business when I was in college, I mean, I had no idea what I was doing. I was signing contracts I had no business of getting into, and there were so many times when I was like, oh gosh, I really hope this goes well, so that I don't have to rely on this contract because I don't know what's in it. And so that's what my goal today is, to get you. Yeah, they're intimidating for sure. Yes. So contracts are definitely, they can be intimidating, and I think the reason why they're so scary and the reason why they can be intimidating is because most of us aren't lawyers, we don't have a legal background, and so how the heck can we know that we have the right things in the contract? Well, I think what's really important to remember is exactly what a contract is. So all a contract actually is, and some of them even call themselves this, it's an agreement. Two people or two parties, or more than two, are coming together and they're agreeing and entering into this agreement to form some kind of relationship. And what a contract ultimately is a description of that relationship. So who's responsible for what, who's expected to perform or pay what, who is going to take care of what. It's basically a nice little long list of your relationship with another person or party. So that's, I hope that makes it a little less scary, knowing that it's ultimately a huge and legal list of your expectations and responsibilities. And when is a contract formed? Because I think a lot of you probably already have contracts. I mean, if you're here today and you're thinking, oh gosh, I really need to make a contract, but if you've been doing work for clients, or if you've been accepting money or something like that, you may already have a contract that's been formed. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So basically, the way a contract is formed is through what's called offer plus acceptance plus consideration. An offer is an offer to do something or not do something. So for example, if I were to say, I will paint your house, that's an offer. Someone hasn't responded to that yet or not. So when I offer someone and I say, I will paint your house, I will hand letter your envelopes, I will take your photos for your wedding, any kind of offer like that. That's what we're talking about. And then there's an acceptance. So somebody has to accept that offer. If nobody accepts it, or if there's a certain amount of time that passes and that person doesn't get back to you, I mean, no one's going to, well, I shouldn't say no one, but it's very unlikely that if you send a client a proposal and 2 years later they respond and they say, yes, I'd like to do this, I'm finally getting married or something, like that's a very unlikely situation where you would be held to that pricing proposal that you already sent them. So, you know, the client has to accept, and they have to, or whoever is on the other side, they have to accept it within a certain amount of time. It can't be unreasonably long. So that's the offer. I offer to hand letter your wedding envelopes. Acceptance, yes, I agree. I want you to hand letter my wedding envelopes. Okay, well, now we have to talk about the terms and things like that. You know, how are you getting paid, all those kinds of things. So we're going to talk about that in a second. But there's actually a third thing that you also need for this contract to be what's considered a valid contract, and that is consideration. And that's exactly what we're talking about, is the terms of the agreement. So somebody on each side has to be giving something up, and this could be their time, this could be money. There has to be what's called a legal detriment. So you are offering to hand letter someone's wedding envelopes, and they are offering to give you money. So you're losing your time, but gaining money, and they're losing their money, but gaining something that they otherwise would not have been able to do themselves or something like that. So you guys are both getting something valuable in consideration of something that you've lost that's also valuable to you. So this is what an offer is, this is what acceptance is, and then now we're talking about implied versus written agreement. So like I said, even if you are like, oh gosh, I really need a contract, I don't have one yet, you know, I whatever, you actually, if you're accepting money from clients, you may already have a contract, and that's because there's something called an implied agreement. And what an implied agreement is it's when you perform some kind of action and accept money for it. That's so even though there's no written agreement there that says, you know, I, Christina Scalera, will hand letter 50 envelopes for the price of blah blah blah. just by writing them an email and saying, my price is this per envelope, and the person just sends you whatever, $50, to hand letter 50 envelopes. You begin that work for them. There could be there's likely a contract that's been formed there, even though there's no written agreement. And that's really significant because if you don't have a written agreement, if you just have this kind of implied contract where you started to do something, so you started an action, you started to hand letter those envelopes or take those photos or whatever, and someone's paid you, that's really significant because at that point you don't have any other terms, so you don't have any idea about how the agreement could be canceled, what's going to happen if the person doesn't like your hand lettered envelopes, do you owe the money back? You don't have any kind of understanding of the agreement. You just kind of have this de facto agreement in place, and that's an implied agreement. So contrast that with a written agreement where you can set out your terms, you can set out your expectations, you can set out the responsibilities of each person or each party ahead of time, so you know exactly what you're getting into. You're not signing up for something that you didn't agree to. You know exactly what that person is going to do for you, how they're going to pay you, when they're going to pay you. So that's the difference between an implied and written agreement. So even though you think you might not have a contract, you may actually have a contract that a court or something like that could hold you to if push came to shove. So moving on, we've covered those things. So when is a contract compromised or void? So a lot of people come to me and they ask me, is this a valid contract? And the short answer is yes, if it has an offer and acceptance and consideration, those things that we just talked about. But there's some instances where a contract will be considered void, as if it never existed, and those instances are usually in the cases of fraud and material misrepresentation. So if you are, and I don't think anybody here would intentionally do this, but if you're accidentally holding out something that isn't true and the client is entering into an agreement with you based on that thing, that's considered a material misrepresentation. And then obviously fraud is you are saying something that's completely not true, whether it's intentional or not. So, if you are telling your client that you can deliver full wedding planning services for $200, and they enter into that agreement, and let me think of maybe that's not a good example. I can think of a really good example actually in my own life that doesn't have to relate to business, but I entered into a lease agreement at one point, and I signed off on the contract, and it said that the apartment was 900 square feet. Well, in fact, I measured it, and it was 636 square feet. So that's a really good example of something that was a material misrepresentation. That was the square footage of the apartment was not correctly stated on the contract, and as such, that contract was completely void. It was as if it never existed, and I didn't owe any money out of that situation because that was such a gross error on the landlord's part to miscalculate 600 versus 900 square feet. Incapacity to sign. I know a lot of you are photographers and you might be shooting things like senior sessions, and a lot of the times the parents are paying, and so the parents are the ones entering into the contract. But if, for example, you had some minors that were getting married or that are not getting married, sorry, if you had some minors that were entering into some kind of photography contract, like a senior portrait agreement or whatever, she was having a party and she wanted to hire you to let her some calligraphy signs for her or something like that, someone that's under the age of 18 doesn't have the capacity to sign, and so there's no contract between you. It depends on the state. You may have some rights if she comes of age during the course of working together, but you need to make sure that if you're working with a younger population or if you're working with a business, that you're entering into an agreement with the person that actually has the capacity to sign. So, getting the owner of that business to sign the contract instead of the administrative assistant or something like that where they may not have the capacity to sign. And this last one is a huge one. I preach about this all the time. Failure to have a full integration or merger clause. What the heck is that? That sounds like super scary and weird and legal. And all that means is that you, in your contract, in your written agreement, you don't have something in there that says that this is the complete understanding between the people or the parties entering into the contract. So a lot of times, we'll have a contract, it's written, okay, we pulled it off the Google and piece it together or whatever. and then we just kind of hope that's okay. And if it's not okay, we talk to each other via email or whatever. Well, that can get really confusing. It can get really messy. If there's a problem later on down the road, it's very likely, if you don't have something that says that your written agreement was the full understanding between you two, that and you try to pull in emails, that those emails would be contradictory and they may be harmful for you and your business. So you want to make sure that the contract actually says something in there that says this is the whole agreement. Like, sorry, Charlie, if you forgot to put anything in there, we can add an amendment, but this is our understanding. This is our agreement, so that you're not going back later and scrambling trying to find that weird email that you got at 1 a.m. and all these other, the text message from the client or whatever, and then piecing all that together as evidence, if that client were to try to come back and say, they don't want to continue the agreement, or they canceled their wedding and they want all their money back, and those kinds of nightmare scenarios that aren't so far out of the question for most of us. Okay. I hope if you guys have questions, I hope you're writing them down, because we're going to have a quick Q&A at the end of today's presentation, and we're going to get to go through all this stuff. So if anything's confusing, or if you want a little more clarity on something, please write your questions down, and we're going to come back to those and cover those. So when do you need a contract? You need a contract when you want to make sure that you have a full understanding of the expectations and obligations of each party. So looking at what you are going to perform or give to that other person, and what they're going to give and perform for you. And so you need a contract if there's any money at stake. You need a contract if there is any liability at stake. And you're going to know that there's money or liability at stake because these are pretty big things. You're entering into a partnership with someone, you're starting a business with someone, you're starting a website with someone, you're starting to collaborate on a lot of things with someone. Those kinds of situations are usually where a lot of money comes up at stake, or there's some kind of liability at stake. And so, as we talked about in the first Biz Chic webinar that we did about legalizing your biz and getting your LLC set up and things like that, we talked about the dangers of having a partnership without an LLC or some other business entity. And so having a contract like that in place that is a full understanding of your agreement between the two parties and what exactly you have to do in that partnership, that's a really good place for a contract, and that can help reduce your liability, your personal liability, and it can also explain exactly how the money's divvied up, so that if there's ever a situation where you're unsure or unclear as to how you're getting paid, either by your partner or a client or something like that, it's very clear in your agreement, because you've already set it out ahead of time when you had a clear head. You had, you were thinking rationally. You weren't getting the email from the client on a Friday night at 5 o'clock that says, I want to cancel everything, I found a different photographer, whatever it is. You already have that agreement in place that was written from a really clear, positive place that you can refer back to, rather than responding in a very angry, unprofessional way. You can always fall back on that contract, because you already know what it is that's going to happen in that situation. So another question I get all the time is, can I include this? Yes and no. I mean, there's no way to answer this in a really great, solid way. The things that you can include in contracts are things that are either impossible or illegal or things like that. And so the great thing about contracts is that if you want something in there, you can put it in there, and the other person doesn't have to sign that agreement. Or if you don't have a written agreement, which obviously I recommend having, but if you have some kind of implied agreement, and you want to include something that in your services, or disinclude something in your services, going forward, if you just don't engage in that particular thing, or if you say in your written agreement that you're not going to include something, or you aren't going to include something, or you add something to the document, making sure that it's as clear and concise as you can. Obviously, having a lawyer draft that kind of extra language, or adding in a provision or something like that is ideal. But just practically speaking, I know it's not a financial reality for everybody to have an attorney go over their contract, every few years or so. So yeah, I mean, looking at things, looking at what you want to include, looking at why you want to include something, and then figuring out the best way to include it, making sure it makes sense to the other people that are going to be signing your agreement. This, we're going to talk a little bit later about actually sending and receiving contracts, and this is going to relate to the concept of making sure that your clients or the other party is actually reading the contract. This is a problem I see come up all the time, where the client doesn't actually read anything. They just kind of, you know, especially on electronic contracts, they just kind of click or sign or type or whatever it is. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Another thing, people always ask me, how can I make my contracts better? You know, I don't know. Get your numbers really, really solid in there. So double, triple, quadruple check all of your numbers. Make sure that your payment plans are, you know, written out by date instead of 30 days from XYZ event. Those kinds of ambiguous provisions that have you listing out, you know, 365 days from the start of the agreement, like that's really difficult for anybody to follow. You don't have to be a lawyer to know that having a date instead of writing out a range of days or something like that is a lot easier to follow. It's much easier to know that you need to have your photos to your client by April 16th than it is to think, okay, well, 30 days from March 4th is that April 4th or is that April 3rd? Like, it's really, really easy when you just have a solid date in there. So making sure that things like your payments are on a schedule. So whatever, your first payment's due March 1st, your second payment's due April 1st. Instead of having, you know, the first payment due on March 1st and then the next payment due 60 days later, or the next payment due not, you know, whatever it is, so that you're not calculating that out. That's annoying for clients. It's not professional, in my opinion, and it's really, really hard to keep up with. So just make things easy. List those dates out. Make sure the payment amounts are listed next to those dates. Make it super simple, super straightforward, clear. And then double, triple, quadruple check those numbers because that is what you're signing. And so if you have the wrong numbers in there, I mean, if they're grossly wrong, you may not be held to that, but why take that chance? Just do the due diligence to check those numbers and make sure that the dates are right, that any numbers are right, that everything in there is as correct as it can be from your perspective. And that's what I mean by, you know, be as specific as possible. So. Okay. Contracts also don't have to be complicated. In fact, the entire legal world is moving towards a very nice version of contracts compared to the old school way where there was a lot of legalese and a lot of like theretofore, where within, like all those crazy terms and things like that. I immediately know how old a lawyer is based on reading the contracts that they draft and edit. That was me clapping because I got really excited there. But I know immediately how old they are and when they went to law school, because the newer lawyers that you see that have been drafting in the last 10 years or so, they have started to drop things like, you know, where to and whereas and things like that from their contracts, because they've realized that, one, lay people don't read that, and I mean, honestly, as an attorney, you just don't read that. You know, it was like a very old school thing to include those kinds of things. So yeah, having things in plain, easy to read, clear English, and having the ability to actually understand what you're sending to your clients and having your clients having the ability to actually understand what they're signing is a lot more valuable than having some important sounding document. Some other things, okay, I said fine to put things in plain English. It is so fine to put things in plain English, as long as you understand what it is that you're signing. I do think it's more important for you and your clients to understand what you're signing rather than have those big words in there. It's also very appropriate to use examples. So a lot of times with payments or payment plans or payment schedules, you know, or even cancellation provisions, things like that, where it's really important. That's real money. That's your business. That's the blood and that's the heart and soul of your business is how you're getting paid and when you're getting paid and how much. It's totally appropriate to use examples in your contract. So example, Sally goes to whatever and buys XYZ and then she owes this much money. That's totally fine. If that helps you understand what it is that you are signing or what your clients will be signing with you, go for it. So making clients initial important provisions, this is also something that you can definitely do. Like I said, if nobody's reading your agreement, it's pretty much worthless. Not not in the sense that it's not valid, but in the sense that you're going to have clients that come back later on and say, I want a refund, blah, 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 and they didn't read the agreement. So they don't even know what they've signed. They don't know the refund terms. They don't know your policy. They don't know how it works. And so it's not that you can't hold them to that refund policy, but it's really hard to tell a client, you know, this is what my refund policy is, and then have them come back and be really upset and angry and think that, you know, you tried to pull one over on them in your contract or hide it or something like that. And so it's great to have clients' initial important things like cancellation provisions or payment plans, you know, so that if that were to ever happen and they, you know, they can never accuse of you of burying it. They had to sign or initial next to whatever important provision was there for you. Okay, so who's entering into the contract? This is something that a lot of people think they understand because it seems like it would be really straightforward. It's like, okay, you know, I'm the photographer and here's the bride and we're entering into this contract together. But it's not always that straightforward. So actually, I'll stay on this for just a second. So who enters into the contract? This is something where if you think there's a certain party that's paying for something, such as the father of the bride, but he's not signing the contract, it's a really good idea to consider having him sign the contract as well, you know, and not just the bride and groom, because I know, it's so hard to hear this, guys, but I know when you enter into a contract with or you think you're entering into a contract with a bride and groom as their photographer or calligrapher or whatever, that you have the duty to do everything that you can for the bride and the groom. Or maybe the bride and groom aren't even on the contract. Maybe it's only dad or mom or whatever that's signed the agreement, but you know, it's for the bride and groom's wedding. I know it's really hard to hear this, but you actually have a duty to perform whatever you're doing for that other party. You have a duty to perform it for the person that's signed. And so if it's only dad or mom or, you know, sister, brother, or friend on the contract, that's actually who you have a legal obligation to fulfill your services for and with. So making sure that if you think that, you know, dad's paying for the agreement, something like that, that you're getting that other signature on there. And from a legal perspective, lawyers generally tend to like as many signatures as they can get on an agreement because each person can be held liable for executing. Well, executing just means making sure that everything happens in the agreement. So making sure that everybody is paying, making sure that everybody is doing whatever they've agreed to do in the agreement. So for example, if, you know, bride, groom, mom and dad all enter into the agreement and bride and groom can no longer pay, you're not sitting there as a photographer or whatever, floral designer. I keep using photographer, but, you know, you're not sitting there as the wedding planner or something like that, twiddling your thumbs and being owed a ton of money and not having any way to get it, because at that point they are you have other people that are now obligated to pay you. So making sure that you have the correct people on there. Another thing that I see a lot of times is okay, so a lot of times I see people entering into agreements as themselves, as their personal person. So, you know, entering into contracts as whatever, Jane Doe instead of Jane Doe Inc. or Jane Doe LLC. And this is significant because if you were a photographer and you were to enter into a contract with someone, let's just say I'm a photographer, I enter into a contract as Christina Scalera Photography, Christina Scalera Photography, and that's what I put on there, or even just Christina Scalera, and that's it. If that person were to have a problem, they were to sue me in false claims court, something like that, I would be personally liable because I actually entered into it in my personal capacity. And so it's a good idea to sign contracts as your legal entity, whatever that is. So, for example, when I enter into client contracts, I'm entering into it as the Christina Scalera Law Group, LLC, or Christina Scalera LLC, depending on which of my companies is entering into that contract. So just being aware of that, especially you know, if you're a product designer, graphic designer, something like that, and you're entering into like big licensing agreements, you know, making sure that it's the appropriate person or party entering into the agreement. So, you know, whatever, your partnership or your LLC or something like that. where else do you need to list this? So a lot of people have questions. Oh my gosh, if I enter into a contract as my business, who signs it? Like, do I sign it as whatever, like the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company? No, you sign it as in your authority to sign it as whatever, the owner of the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company. So let's just say I'm Michael Scott and I'm the owner of the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company. I'm not writing in cursive the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company. I'm writing Michael Scott in my signature, and then underneath that on the signature line it just says owner Dunder Mifflin Paper Company, or whatever, Vice President Dunder Mifflin Paper. Someone who has the authority to enter is entering into it on behalf of their company and the role that they have at that company. So that's another question that I see come up a lot of times. Okay, so we talked about this a little earlier. Sorry, I skipped ahead, guys. Which client or clients need to sign my contract? Again, that just goes back to, especially as we're working in the wedding industry, or as a graphic designer, if you're working with companies or small businesses, just making sure that you have the correct people or persons or parties signing your agreement, so that if payment is ever due and someone's not paying you, because unfortunately it's going to happen one day or another, it's going to happen where someone owes you money, that you can actually have some kind of recourse and go after the other people on the agreement that you perform services for, so they owe you money, and they can work it out with the other people, I guess, if they end up paying. Okay, so hey guys, let me see if I skip ahead.
Keep going. You've got a few slides left.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Yeah, so I want to remind you guys that, since you are in business and you are a business owner, you need to keep respecting your business. And, having a contract not only conveys that you are a professional, it also conveys that you take this seriously. A lot of people ask me, how do I send contracts? And there's the really old school way of just signing paper documents. That's totally fine, but in my opinion, it's really, really difficult to do this. And if you ever get PDFs that you have to sign, you have to figure out where this is. It's just a pain in the butt. So as a business owner, make it easy for your clients to sign. I'm a legal consultant for HoneyBook, but I have been using their program since way before then. I love their program. They're great. Obviously, it's for people that are working in the creative industry. Obviously, I work in the creative industry with creative entrepreneurs, but I'm not their ideal client. I'm an attorney, and I'm using it to send my clients contracts, and I'm using it to send my clients messages and upload documents and things like that for them. So it's a really nice, clean interface that I can use for invoicing and sending contracts and things like that. And then there's also tons of other programs out there. So Abigail and Emily have been so sweet to put this together, and they put HelloSign and 17 Hats. Both are platforms I'm familiar with and I've heard very good things about, but haven't used personally. So maybe they could talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A. But sending a contract online is not only completely legally fine for most documents, it's also, like I said, it's very professional, it's very quick, and it's easy. And we're always talking about, how do you book those clients? Well, here's the secret. You send them something that's really, really easy for them to understand and sign and access and all of those things, so that you're not resending the PDF at 1 o'clock in the morning when your bride is freaking out about whatever, the weather or something like that, and seeing if she owes, she can get back money or something, because she can just log into any of these programs and look at what she signed. The contracts that aren't legally valid, if they're signed electronically, are things that are more permanent. So things like deeds for property and wills and stuff like that, not necessarily client agreements. So I am very comfortable and very happy sending my clients agreements online. I think you should be too. I would definitely look into some kind of online platform if you don't already have something available, just because you'll make your life easier. You'll make your clients so much. You'll make your clients' life much easier, and it's a great way to keep everything professional, clean, organized, all those things. And like I said, if you're able to send your clients those agreements right away, you already have your, but as you're getting set up, I know a lot of us are just getting started, or maybe we're switching from full-time to, from full-time jobs to our creative passion or something like that, taking the time now, not only, we just talked about getting your LLC or your other entity set up or something like that, but, taking the time to get that kind of set up, the bank accounts, all that. But as part of that, you should be also thinking about your client contracts and getting those set up so that when you do have an inquiry, you're not like, oh gosh, what am I going to do? I need to send this today and I really want to book this client, but I don't have a contract. And then, your whole day is shot because you have to whatever. Obviously, there's easy things like I sell client contract templates, but if that's not an option financially or something like that, you just go to Google, piece something together, who knows if it's good, and you spend all day putting together the client contract. Not ideal, so start looking into creating a client contract now and making it good now before you have the nightmare bride or before you have the client that you really want to book but you don't have a contract to book them with. And then, making sure that it's delivered in a professional, clean way. So making sure that the document reads well, that it doesn't have any grammatical errors, obviously, that it says exactly what you want it to say, that those numbers are correct, and it's delivered in a way that's professional and hopefully beautiful too, so that your clients, they start to build that trust with you. They start to know, like, and trust you. And like I said, just having that easy access for the clients, where they can access their contracts over and over again or whatever. Even like HoneyBook has a feature where you can type something like a message next to a certain whatever. That's really helpful as well. If you have an online provider that will let you send contracts, send and sign contracts, so that your clients can ask you questions right there and then on anything that they might be wondering about or that isn't clear to them, and that you can explain to them in a way that's not only quick and expedient, but also in a way that's easy to understand, and that they get something on their phone or their email right away. So those are a lot of the things that we're considering.